Welcome to Establish a Million, week 14. We've got a fun slate, and it's a slate that involves a lot of late swap stuff. So I figured, who better to go out and get to come on and be an honored guest with me to talk some late swap stuff than Drew Dinkmeyer. So let's welcome Drew Dinkmeyer to the show this week. Drew, thanks for coming on.
Like you had the projections table up while doing that intro. So really strong start.
I liked it. I liked that view. It's a new view. We're trying out some different production angles.
Well, I'm happy to be on the show as a guest once again. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm happy. You're happy, and I'm ready to. I don't know what happened last week. I got my
last week. We all thought we were going to get rich. Well, I thought I was going to get rich because all the chalk hit, and I played a decent bit of the chalk stacks with Tampa Bay, Brady and Gronk and Godwin. And then Brandon Ayuk just failed me miserably.
Oh, yeah.
I was like top 5 in the 7-7-7 with Ayuk and Sony Michel and the Raiders defense going into the late games. And I barely cashed. I think I finished like 16th or 18th in the top 30 cash or something like that.
Yeah, I had one team where I was like Marquise Brown, Freiermuth, low owned late. And I was like, I might be live. And then like 10 minutes later, like Cooper Kupp goes from 0 points to 30. And I'm like, I'm not even going to cash.
It was a chalky slate. It was interesting though, because it was like nobody got like outsized on the chalk from like a really high ownership perspective. It's just the guys that were of the higher owned guys were the top performers on the slate.
Yeah, running back, I spent a lot of time and energy figuring out who was going to get squeezed in small field, and the answer was pretty much no one. Like I was right on Fournette, but then like JT stayed the same. Like Jamal Williams was the same. Like they were all the same. And then performance-wise, which is just totally hindsight, but like it didn't even matter as long as you didn't play the really low-owned Mixon and Eckler's who sucked. Like everyone was between 20 to 28 points at running back.
The thing that mattered was, and one of the guys, so I last week had talked about Montgomery looking like a piece to kind of X off along with Jamal Williams, just because they're team risk on systemic failure, and Jamal did fail, but Montgomery ended up being kind of the differentiator among the like cheaper running back options, just because he saved you salary compared to those guys when he got in the 20s.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing, was like, even if you played straight chalk, like if you had Gibson, Michelle, or you went contrarian with Montgomery, just not spending salary because all the points were the same. And it is worth noting, we kind of have had a tight end conversation last week that is going to sound really, really funny if you go back and listen to it, as we get one tight end in the 20s with Gronk. We get another tight end in the 30s with Goddard. And then we get someone breaking through the 40s with Kittle, which we kind of had a funny conversation about that. And like the 3% chance that happened, just happened to hit. And I mean, it's still tough. It's hard to know. Do you play an entire season trying to catch that once? Like
the Kittle play.
Right.
Like, I feel like I have, except for last week. So and I had Ayuk, so I feel really tortured right now on this situation.
Yeah, tight ends, but like and Goddard, we've been playing a lot of too, and I think you had a lot of Goddard, and then of course, Drew, the teams that did well ended up being like the double tight end teams, even with the running back chalk hit,
which was crazy because it was the first week all season long that I literally unchecked tight end from the flex in my MME runs. The only time I've done it all season long, because I was like, there's too many good running back plays. I want to be overweight all these running backs, and then Kittle just goes nuclear, and Gronk and Goddard do their thing, and so it was a week that was really the separator. The wide receivers, the chalk ones hit, and so like it was hard to separate at wide receiver. The separator was how many tight ends did you play, and did you play the right ones?
Yeah. So that's always going to be a little bit of a tough slate, which, and my sheet, I kind of had like my top 4 tight ends were like 3 of those tight ends in Freiermuth, and I definitely had the most Freiermuth of the 4.
Yeah, that's tough. I another guy that similar to that. Like I played a Brady, Evans, Godwin stack, thinking Brady, Godwin, Gronk would be the chalk. Evans actually ended up being kind of as owned as Godwin, which was surprising to me.
I don't think he was as owned as Gronk. I don't think he was as owned as Godwin.
So in the 7-7-7, he was 20% and Godwin was 25%.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So he definitely got up
it
there.
was really surprising to me. And so I played those two with Pitts, thinking that's a unique combination, right? Pitts off of Gronk and Evans and Godwin together. And I like Pitts was another one of those guys that's in that mix that just didn't generate any sort of ceiling. The Kyle Pitts Ponzi scheme. Hopefully it follows the T Higgins Ponzi scheme at some point this year.
The Kyle Pitts, Mike Evans versus Russell Gage,
brutal.
Rob Gronkowski, 2v2.
Brutal. Shout out to CB35, long time DFS small stakes grinder who hit the play action, the 20 max $3 for 100K last week with the Gage, Gronk, Kittle, double tight end stack, double Tampa Bay with an Atlanta bringback.
Way to go, CB. We've gone from almost skipping the recap to having our longest recap of the year. We'll go to game stacks. I got a question from Chris Allen, friend of the show, who was asking about these passing games and we've got some of them on the slate, including Buffalo, Tampa Bay, playing each other, where there's a lot of options you can pick from. Like, how do you kind of arrive at your double stack? And I've gotten some iteration of this contest or this question, a few times over the course of the season. And also, kind of what do you do with the guys in your other lineups that you don't play? Like, are you just forcing yourself to take stances? And Drew, do you have, an inclination there as far as,
So a few thoughts I'd give. First, if I'm like hand building like 5 GPP lineups, like last week, there were a couple offenses that I felt really, really good about. And I wanted to have exposure to all the main pieces of that offense, but I kind of would divvy it up across my lineups. So as I alluded to, I had a Brady, Godwin, Evans stack. In another lineup, I had Gronk solo from Tampa Bay. In another lineup, I had Fournette solo from Tampa Bay. And basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say, like, I'm really confident this team is going to score a lot of points. And one of these lineups should capture, put me in a good position for that space that I'm looking at. And then in terms of like building out double stacks, the first thing that I always try to think of is what is their ceiling relative to their price? And does that ceiling relative to price fit the contest that I'm playing? And so in the case of talking like Bills Tampa Bay this week, it's really important for me to think through, can, Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders or Beasley and Knox get the ceiling that I want to be able to compete in the contest that I want relative to their price? Can Godwin and Evans do that together? Can Godwin and Gronk? Can Godwin, Evans, and Gronk do that together? And so that's like the very, very first piece for me is, does the ceiling and the price that I'm going to pay for that ceiling, does it match the type of contest that I'm trying to play? And if it does, then I actually don't worry about ownership as much. Because once I have that piece verified, I can be different in ownership in different places. I can pull contrarian levers at different spots. But if I get the piece wrong on the amount of salary I'm spending for the upside that I can garner, it doesn't matter what I do. It really doesn't matter if they're contrarian or not, because I'm not going to have enough ceiling kind of in the lineup to get there.
Yeah, I did something very similar to Drew, in terms of his Tampa Bay exposure. I did that with the Chargers Bengals game. I had 3 basically Herbert stacks, stacked in 3 different ways, different bringbacks, T Higgins, Mixon, Chase, mix them up. I had a single with Keenan Allen, I had a double with Mike Williams and Cook, and I had a single with Eckler. So I think some of it comes down to, and this is something I've said before, but where's your edge on the certain week? And if you think your edge is just in that game doing really well, that offense doing really well, you want to diversify it a little bit. There's been other weeks, Dallas sticks out. There was a week where Amari Cooper was really chalky, and I wanted to play the Dallas double. And I went a lot heavier on playing like CeeDee Lamb and Dalton Schultz with it. It's the kind of like consciously fading Amari Cooper within that double, just because the ownership was going to be so disparate between him and the other 2 pieces. So it's not going to be a one size fits all answer. You kind of got to, think through it a little bit and really figure out, is your edge just in the ceiling of that game? And you don't care about the ownership, or is your edge in some combination of the ownership and the ceiling? And this week, Buffalo, Tampa, of course, highest total on this slate by like 5 points, and 2 teams that are among the highest in the NFL in pass rate over expectation. They play each other. It could be an absolute bonkers shootout, Drew. And even with, some pretty, high projected ownership on this game, it's our highest game score. And even with it being an expensive game, it's our highest game score, which just goes to show you, how huge the ceiling is. And circling back on the projected field exposure for this game, it's going to be there, but it might not get crazy because of the price tags.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that it's hard to get deep into that game as a result. If you do, you're going to have to get contrarian in a different spot on the cheap side of things. And so I kind of think like
that's the hard part.
I think you're almost basically saying like, look, if I'm stacking Tampa Bay Buffalo, I'm starting to look at the Detroit running back situation, because you're going to be spending a decent bit on the quarterback, the wide receiver, potentially tight end if you're including Gronk in that spot. And so now where are you going to get the salary savings? You're just not going to have money to spend at running back. And most of the running back, like chalkier pieces this week are upper tier or middle upper tier kind of spend guys. So you start to look in like, okay, this is the way that this build looks. What is going to look really chalky with those types of builds is Jeff Wilson at running back. So I would guess that Jeff Wilson is going to be very chalky on the whole, but I think he's also going to be in a higher percentage of Buffalo, Tampa Bay lineups than any other running back because he just fits them so well.
Yeah, there's almost no one viable under 5K. The guy, if you, in MME, I think you could take a shot on is Gabriel Davis, who's had a red zone role. His role's expanding a little bit. I don't know if I have the stomach for that in small field, when we're projecting a guy for only 7 DraftKings points or not even. But yeah, even Knox is up to 5K. I do like Beasley. I kind of like the Allen doubles a little bit more on price, but so I go back and forth between, okay, I'll just do I think Diggs is a really good play at where we have him projected field exposure wise this week. So part of me wants to just do some Diggs or even Beasley like minis with the other side.
Yeah.
And part of me is wondering like maybe people will just get away from onslaughting it all together. And I could actually try that even especially in like the really small field stuff.
So I think a couple things on the Tampa Bay Buffalo game. I think because of the price tags of the high end pieces, if you were to skinny stack this game and hope that all the production gets concentrated in one of the receiving options, I think that's a really strong approach. I think what will be popular is game stacking this game with skill players, but playing Taysom Hill on DraftKings, where Taysom Hill's really cheap.
Yeah.
I think that will be a really popular approach. On FanDuel, Taysom Hill's priced up with these other quarterbacks, the other elite quarterbacks. I don't think that will be played like that. But I think that's going to be an approach that's popular. I think what you have to really be thoughtful of on the Tampa Bay Buffalo stacks is just when you build them, look at the rest of your lineup, and does the rest of your lineup still have enough ceiling to get there? Because if the lineup needs to be carried entirely by Tampa Bay Buffalo, you're probably not going to find enough contrarian pieces in the Tampa Bay Buffalo game to separate when you're getting carried up the leaderboard. So you're going to need ceiling that can separate somewhere else on the roster. And that might lead me to more single stacks than double stacks on Tampa Bay and Buffalo, when I usually play Tampa Bay almost exclusively as doubles.
Yeah. And I wasn't kidding about the late swap stuff, but you do have some outs, to late swap, off of this game where
this is a very heavy late swap week. I think all the attractive game stacks are really in the late window. There's a lot of attractive chalk in the early window as well. It's not quite as clear as the weeks we've talked about in the past, where the running back chalk is really condensed on a few early options and you get all that information from early. The running back chalk is a little bit more spread this week over a number of options. But I do think with we have 4 late games, and I'd say of those 4 late games, 3 of them are stackable. So there are ways to kind of pivot around.
Yeah. The hard part will be, like Drew said, is like, do you have the flexibility to pivot? Yes. Are you going to have the information to know what to pivot to, that's where it's shaky. Because I was gonna say, like, if you're heavy Buffalo Tampa Bay, like you can play Jamar Chase instead of Chris Godwin and take that double to the single and hope you get the concentrated volume. But are you gonna know you should do that? You might just be blowing in the wind there.
Which I would say really encourages taking some contrarian positions in the early games. So like find a few players from the 1 o'clock games that you think are going to be good contrarian plays, and then really, really try to take positions on them that are overweight so you can get a good idea on what you're doing with late swaps. Like otherwise you're not going to have a really great handle on how to approach it because you're not going to have enough information.
Yeah. And even then, like, it's kind of tough because I think some of the better contrarian options early are wide receivers, but then you're eating up your stack spots.
Yeah.
And you might just have to accept maybe being, a little light on the Buffalo Tampa Bay stack, I guess, like as we talked through it. Looking at the other games, San Francisco, Cincinnati, that's the other late game. Kittle, massive ceiling. We're projecting Debo out. I don't think that's official. We'll keep an eye on it. Jeff Wilson, like, pretty obvious value. I know he had some health concerns, but he got in some full practices at the end of the week that I really think it's going to be pretty heavy Jeff Wilson, even if Hasty, and he's so cheap that even with Hasty mixing in, like, I mean, Jeff Wilson's 4,400 on DK. I don't know why he's so cheap because we weren't getting, I don't know. We just weren't getting that many backs at that price. I guess we got Michelle last week at 4,300.
Yep.
On FanDuel, Jeff Wilson doesn't even crack 5K, which I didn't know was possible at running back.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So he's 4,900. So that's wild. But yeah, this game's just kind of flooded with upside. So it gets there, and then things get a little murkier. The game that I think we both like a little bit better than the game scores is Dallas, Washington.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is Zeke and Gibson project to be kind of chalky, and that's affecting the game score. But if we're stacking it, we kind of care more about the receivers, and CeeDee Lamb, Mari Cooper, Dalton Schultz, Terry McLaurin all look really fine. There's some pretty easy DAC doubles with McLaurin coming back. I'm a little concerned that for props, we've bet a lot of unders in this game, and reading Thorman snaps and pace. Like, I wonder if we're projecting above average plays for both games, but not by a lot. So I'm a little concerned for those props, but from a DFS standpoint, like, you can see where the ceiling might expand beyond our projections if this game is more up tempo. Our current plays is like about 64.5 for both teams.
Yeah. I think Dallas is the team that early in the season, we were kind of picking every game that Dallas was in, and we're like, okay, this is a stack spot. And then as the season has worn out on, we've seen through injury, through Dallas kind of playing to game scripts, a lack of interest in Dallas stacks that now kind of brings you back to like your anchored position early in the season where it's like, okay, now I'm getting this at contrarian levels. And so I think this spot is pretty interesting. And I certainly like the Dallas, passing game have all year. And this is a great opportunity to get it at pretty low ownership.
Drew, we can, if we want to, afford the Mahomes doubles this week. And the question will be, how much leverage are you going to create on the Buffalo Tampa Bay stuff? Because you're not exactly getting off the chalk build there, because it's kind of the same salary thing with Kelsey, Tyreek, Mahomes being expensive. And then, the bring back on Las Vegas is going to be 6K Jacobs, 6K Renfro, and owned, like you said. So that one's like kind of in, that's why that one's like in this tough tweener spot. That total looks low to me. I think the weather looks okay.
Well, I mean, Kansas City's offense has just sputtered, and their defense has been playing better of late. And it is a little windy. KC's defense at home is usually plays well, and then also it's the second matchup for a divisional opponent, and usually those are slightly lower scoring contests as well.
So on FanDuel, you see we get kind of a contrarian game here with Jacksonville, Tennessee popping a little bit. I always like to go to the individual teams and kind of be like, like why is that happening? I think, there's just a lot, like the Tennessee team total is 26, which is pretty strong.
Yeah.
It's hard to stack but you can see kind of like sub 5% on Foreman, Julio Jones, guys that have like kind of legitimate upside. The really tough part, and you found it before, like, FanDuel, we need touchdowns. Are we going to get it from Jacksonville? I don't know. James Robinson could get squeezed a little bit at running back, and he would be, I think that the piece you'd want, but that's maybe more like a Julio Robinson mini or a Foreman.
Yeah, I actually I think you just ignore Jacksonville at this point. Like I don't know that there's enough ceiling there to. I mean, how many times have we even seen them score like 2 touchdowns in a game, let alone find one player that could score 2 touchdowns? But I do think Tennessee is one of the best spots to be early contrarian, just because they have this really high team total. Nobody's coming through with much ownership with it. So I think, being overweight the field on guys like Foreman and Julio, I think make a lot of sense in terms of how it sets you up to garner more information late. Foreman especially, because it's just hard to differentiate at running back.
Yeah. 2 games that are near the bottom of our game scores. Like Baltimore, Cleveland, I get these weird the vibes I got on Cincy Pitt from a couple weeks ago, where most of the time it's gross, but like I could see it getting, but the problem is on this slate, the payoffs not really there. Like if you did like a Chubb Hollywood mini in MME, I could see that you're getting like a really disproportionate reward if that hits, but you're sacrificing a ton of projection on it. And I'm not going to play that in small field. I'm just saying I get those vibes, but like, I'm going to, obviously respect the math here a little bit and not go in on it. Seattle, Houston's a little more interesting, where if everyone came off Cooks, who is on the injury report, but expected to play, like I'm really interested to see, I guess, where the actual final field exposures come in on Metcalf and Lockett, because right now we have them above those Dallas Washington guys we mentioned.
Yeah.
And I can't play it if that's the case, but if that were to flip, I might have some interest there.
Yeah. I think that will be interesting. On the Baltimore Cleveland side, the one thing that I'll say is, after watching Pittsburgh's defense on Thursday night and having seen Baltimore and Cleveland both struggle against Pittsburgh's defense, like relatively recently, I'm like, whoa, like what's going on with Baltimore and Cleveland's offenses?
Yeah. Well, Baltimore has a team total of 20, which I think is egregiously low, and they have hit that team total once in like 6 games. So it's been ugly.
Wow.
So that's why the team total is where it is. I thought this was like kind of, but like it's where sometimes I'll take the long view and think like, there's obviously issues here. There's obviously personnel problems, but it's still Lamar Jackson and whatnot. We saw them play a crazy game just last year. What was like 45-42 or something.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it. There's some Denver, Detroit stuff, Giants, Chargers stuff.
The Giants, Chargers stuff. I will just say the Chargers are going to be super chalky because they're without Keenan Allen. And so that's going to flood some ownership to Mike Williams, also to Austin Eckler. And then on DraftKings, Jared Cook is a cheap tight end. And then the Giants, it's hard to find anybody that you're excited about as a bring back. And then on top of that, like, usually the Chargers we've attacked with running backs this year. Saquon's kind of cheap on DraftKings, but he's going to be in the mix with like all these other running backs that's like decently owned. So like it's a hard way to play the Chargers unless you get into the really cheap Chargers wide receivers that are not Mike Williams. It's kind of hard to play and differentiate that game. So that's why, from a game stack perspective, even though the Chargers pieces look pretty good, they all look like they're going to be owned.
Yeah, and if you're playing Barkley, like you want a sub 5% Barkley. I think at this point, you don't really want to mess around with a 15%. And if we go to running back, in good, well, I guess we'll do quarterback, good chalk, bad chalk, because Taysom kind of sticks out aside from the game stack stuff, at least on DraftKings. But yeah, Taysom, I mean, man, he just seems to always get there, Drew. They put a lot on his shoulders. They left him in this game last week against Dallas for no reason. The game was like over. They're just like, here, just chuck it and keep running. The concern, I guess, if you were to fade Taysom, your hope is that they dominate the Jets so much that they could just like do kind of more straight handoffs to Kamara and like I don't know. But he's obviously a very good value and someone that you don't have to play stacked or probably would be encouraged not to.
Yeah, I think if you're playing Taysom, you probably are playing him naked, and I think you're just stacking other games kind of around it. So I think if you're playing Taysom in MME and using optimizers, you need to be really thoughtful on how you're creating the rules in the optimizers, because it's going to be different than a normal week where you just like automatically stack your quarterbacks and maybe have a bring back and different things like that. You need to kind of set them up a little bit differently. The challenge for me is just that the pricing gap between Taysom and the other like high-end ceiling quarterbacks is a lot. And Taysom's ceiling isn't that far off, and all the skill players that you want to play that do have the ceiling to separate on the slate are generally expensive. So it's really hard for me to get away from Taysom. And then you get into the question of like, well, is taking Cam at a third of the ownership of Taysom, what do you win when you win on that situation? And I definitely see that Cam has like a pretty big upside on that, but I don't know how many points you really make off of Taysom. So I think Taysom's probably good chalk.
I was really proud of myself. I wasn't going to bring up Cam until contrarian ideas.
I know, but I was trying to lean into the good chalk versus bad chalk.
No, I know. I was proud of myself. I wasn't shaming you for that because it's an important point. And yeah, I think Taysom's fine. You're going to kind of have to dictate what you do. On FanDuel, there's not really like good chalk, bad chalk. As always,
everybody's kind of on the same.
$4,900 Jeff Wilson. So you're gonna play whoever you want, kind of.
Yeah. I guess I would say on that scenario, I don't know. I mean, I guess at those projected ownerships, I would probably say that Lamar is maybe questionable chalk there. Just given the other teams, like
maybe for MME, but the thing is, if you're doing small field, like he's kind of the guy that gets squeezed.
You think he is the guy that gets squeezed? Okay.
Oh yeah, I mean they have a 20 team total.
Yeah.
I think we're being more aggressive than the market on Lamar. I actually kind of like it on FanDuel. But we'll go to running back, and I'm just getting a note from Levitan in our Slack that it sounds like McKissick might not actually be back this week.
Oh boy.
Which is gonna, change some stuff. Antonio Gibson, we are already projecting as very chalky, and that's with McKissick that's with McKissick in, but like assuming that he earned, some additional responsibilities. So like, I guess 75% McKissick. So that's going to be an increase in projection, and especially in small field, that ownership's going to get just really large, especially after he hit last week.
That'll be a separator. I think that'll start to make it where, from an ownership perspective, I would imagine that the tier cutoff, like you like to talk about the tier cutoffs on ownership a lot. Looking at that graphic on screen now, I would say the tier cutoff would come after Jeff Wilson in terms of where ownership could really separate. With Eckler, Gibson, Jacobs, Fournette, Jeff Wilson, like being way ahead of Kamara, Barkley, the next kind of group down. And if Gibson and Barkley are the same price on DraftKings, so if McKissick is out and Gibson improves considerably, I think that goes straight from Barkley. Like you're almost immediately taking ownership from Saquon in that spot.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be a tough one to figure out too, as far as the game stack goes, Drew, because like if you're fading Gibson, you definitely want Dallas ahead. And if you want Dallas to kind of hit the nut upside, you kind of want them playing from behind. So it's
I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. It's almost pretty straightforward that you almost like, if you play Gibson, you kind of want to have a Dallas receiver on the way back.
Well, I guess I just mean if you wanted to fade him at chalk, you would want, like, if you wanted to play McLaurin, you'd want Washington from behind, but you don't really want Dallas from ahead, because they're so game script dependent in their play calling. So it's just a little tricky.
No, but what I'm saying is on the Gibson side, if you're playing Gibson at chalk and you're saying like the better scenarios for Gibson are when they're playing from ahead. Well, pair him as a chalk play with a contrarian Dallas wide receiver option, and now you're getting a natural point of differentiation. So you can basically build in rules in an opto or whatever, where anytime you use Gibson, you just increase the Dallas wide receivers and you increase your chances of having a Dallas wide receiver on the opposite side of Gibson.
So Gibson is going to be super chalky. That's going to be I don't know. I'll have to see the updated projection. That's going to be tough for me to figure out in small field what I want to do with him, because it's going to get so high, but he's also going to be such a good play. The other guy that's going to be played a ton is going to be Jeff Wilson. I'm interested to see where that comes in. If he's kind of like in this pecking order, he's going to be a really good play even at 20%.
You think he should be on a whole different level, right?
I don't think he should be on a whole different, like we have him projected as a 1.8 value, but I think there's a chance that we're being conservative and this is the same Jeff Wilson workload that we got against Jacksonville, where it didn't work out, but it was like, quite a phenomenal workload, I guess.
Yeah,
I think there's a chance of that.
Is unbeatable on both sides. Like you don't have options around him that like really project for the same kind of ceiling at that price tag.
Yes.
So he feels like the guy that like
FanDuel, people are going to play him no matter what, because even if you have the conservative projection, he's 4,900.
Yeah. No, but he feels like the guy that should be 35+% owned on both sides. Should be. I don't know that he will.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. As far as the other guys, like it looks like it's gonna be pretty spread out, so it's kind of tough. I guess Jacobs, Eckler, and Fournette, that trio is part of that top tier on DraftKings. And man, it's tough to poke holes in any of them. I think like Eckler has shown a level of volatility that, and we might be assuming that like too much of Keenan Allen goes to Eckler when maybe it doesn't at all. Like maybe nothing changes there, and that base projection maybe is a little bit high. So, but I do think like he's probably going to come back down a little bit if Gibson, soaks up some from everyone.
Yeah. I think he's just from a build perspective, he's the most vulnerable because of the price. Nothing to do with like his projection or just the price. If you're building, you want to save a little bit of cash at the running back spot to be able to afford the high end quarterback stacks or the high end wide receivers. And as a result, Eckler could be the guy that gets a little bit lost in the shuffle. I think that keeps a little bit of a ceiling on his ownership. Yeah.
So Fournette, his role is just so solid right now, and the team total is so huge. He's going to get goal line work. His pass catching role is insane. We're even projecting like less pass catching role than he's actually had the last 3 or 4 weeks. It's been so huge, and Bills do kind of at times funnel stuff to the opposing team's running back. So it's hard to really pick holes with any of the chalk. I think like Zeke, if Pollard's out, Zeke could get to a point where he's fadeable just because of health concerns with Zeke himself, but he was full practice all week too. I'm just saying, like, if I had to choose one to fade, probably him. Josh Jacobs in a game that could go negative game script on the surface looks very good for him, but when you dig deeper with Kenyon Drake out, with Jalen Richard out, the targets for Jacobs have been incredible. So I don't even know if that's necessarily going to be a bad thing for Jacobs if they're in a negative game script, something that we wouldn't have said previously.
He was the guy that like last week, I mean, it didn't end up mattering, but if you played him as the contrarian pivot at running back because you were behind, that was a really sharp play. Because
I did it. Thank you, Drew.
He ended up coming in at like 1% to 2%, something like that. And all the other guys, I mean, and he did well. He just didn't separate, which is
just didn't matter. Yeah.
But I think, you can give yourself the old pat in the back for the Skolansky Bucks last week because that was a good play.
Okay. Good chalk, bad chalk at wide receiver. Mike Williams could get out of control, Drew.
It's a big Mike week.
Starting to catch up with Mike Williams, continues to test negative, so he can actually play this week. It looked like initially he was going to be out. Now it's looking like he's more likely to play. Keenan Allen obviously out. What makes Williams, I think, such a good play on paper is we saw him at the beginning of the year with some shorter ADOT stuff hit a 25% target roll. So it's less of a leap to give him like a really big share of the targets with Keenan out, than it would have been had we not seen that for like a 4-week stretch.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's great. I think it's a tough spot. If you're really confident, like basically, I think for Big Mike to fail, you kind of need the Chargers offense as a whole to fail. And my concern with that is the Giants defense is actually it's not bad. It's pretty good, but the Giants offense with Mike Glennon, I don't know how they'll be able to sustain drives and not give up some short fields to the Chargers that are going to result in like really prime scoring opportunities. So I think he's a tougher fade. If I was, to pick somebody from this group that I would say is more questionable chalk, it would be the Crowder, Renfro, the teams where the offenses have low implied totals that I'm just like, they have a lot of built-in volume, but they're generally not big play threats. So their floors are pretty good, but their ceilings might not be, their ceilings can be great in the right game environment. But if I had to pick, those would be the potential options. And then, maybe Metcalf and Lockett, just because like Seattle has shown a willingness to just sit on the ball. It's a 40.5 total. And so how do you generate upside if Seattle gets up 2 touchdowns early on rushing touchdowns or rando, Swain or Everett touchdowns? What if Gerald Everett stops point shaving? Like there's so many question marks, and how that Seattle game could play.
Yeah, I think the Metcalf one's a really good call, where the team total for Seattle is going to drive like a pretty good projection there everywhere, but there's pretty clear paths to failure or just modest games.
Yeah,
Godwin we've seen be pretty volatile too. It's just such a nut setup for them that it's a little bit scary. I do think Mike Williams could get too steamed up, I guess.
What's the number that changes your opinion on Mike Williams as a play?
I probably want to play Mike Williams above 30%. I don't think with some of the games 35. Out there. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say like he's like bad there. I just think, where some of the opportunities are this week, it's probably going to be, at the wide receiver position for me to differentiate.
When I say 30 or 35, I'm thinking 30 or 35 in large, which means in some of the stuff that you play, that would probably equate to like 50. I assume you're thinking 30 in the stuff that you play, which I think is probably very likely that he hits, right?
Yeah, I think it's very likely he's at a level that I don't want to play him. He's almost assuredly there. Tight end, as always, very different between the two sites. It looks like we're going to get a lot of Austin Hooper stuff. I wonder if Jared Cook, I think Jared Cook's bad chalk if he's really chalky, where just the assumption that these wide receiver targets are going to go to him. Like we're assuming it a little bit. The thing with Cook is he is just like a super cheap part of a team with a really good team total, which is like kind of okay on like any week. And then you're like, so then you could arguably just be free rolling the additional target share. As someone who played Jared Cook last week and watched him catch a 25-yard pass in wide open field and then just fall down, wasn't great. Didn't inspire a ton of confidence.
Did you have different expectations?
I was hoping I could at least see some dad running. I didn't think we were at fall down stage yet.
I mean, sometimes dad running turns into dad falling. It all happens very quickly in life.
But yeah, Hooper, man, Adam really likes Hooper this week, and he's usually got a pretty good feel for this stuff. I'm a little concerned. I don't think I'm playing Austin Hooper on DraftKings.
I think if you just look like quickly at the projected ownership of those 3 top 30, 3,500 and lower guys, you can see that Everett has a higher ceiling and a lower projected ownership by a wide margin. So it seems pretty clear like he's the best of the cheap plays from a tournament perspective.
Yeah, like Hooper, you're just begging for 5 for 30. I mean, that's where we're at. I say that he's going to go nuts, but he's at 6 yards per target each of his 2 seasons with Cleveland. Yeah,
he there's not a lot of run after catch with him either. If you didn't like if you previously invested in Jared Cook and liked watching him run in the open field, Austin Hooper is right up your alley as well.
On FanDuel, those guys are less of an issue because the pricing's looser with the Jeff Wilson stuff. And it's hard to even say there's a bad chalk. It's because it's going to aggregate on these guys that kind of all separate from the position. Pitts is riskier, but you're going to get savings if you take him. Otherwise, you've got Gronk, Kittle, Kelsey, and I don't have any particular issues with any of those three.
Yeah, I think those guys, as we've seen, when they hit their ceiling, it is hard to compete with Kittle or with Kelsey or with Gronk. Gronk fits in that boat as well from a ceiling perspective. So, when they all get on the slate, we've had these weeks where generally like KC has not been on the main slate as much of late. And Kittle had been hurt at different points in the season, and Tampa Bay had not. So we had like one of them usually or two. And you end up getting into the point where on FanDuel you're fading like one of them. And it's a little bit, you can see past a little bit where it's like, okay. But when you start having to fade all three, I think you want to be pretty conscientious of either getting out of the position with somebody else who you think could get close on the ceiling side, or somebody who saves a lot of money from those guys. And that's where, I think it's tough. I think these ownerships are pretty efficient.
Yeah,
so I don't really think any of them are bad chalk.
Yeah, 2 weeks in a row, it's like kind of a tough slate. I think we've really enjoyed. Actually, it's funny. Alex Bickle wrote for FTN an article, and I didn't get to see the whole thing, but kind of like challenging some of like the long held DFS conventions of like, go volatile wide receiver. Running backs more predictable. But we've really, Drew, had kind of a lot of success on some contrarian running back weeks, and it's kind of tough to get there, just expanding from what you said at tight end, but like it's shaping up to be a little bit of a tougher week for me. I do think unlike last week, the chalk isn't maybe quite as strong as it was last week. So there's a little more opportunities. But
I agree. The difference between last week and this week is last week you had some of the best offenses on the slate playing some of the worst defenses in the league. So it was like really hard to see a way that Tampa Bay doesn't score a lot of points in controlled conditions in a dome against Atlanta's defense. This week, you at least have some of these top offenses that we're all like excited about investing in. Again, some other pretty good defenses like Tampa Bay and Buffalo both have really, solid upper end defenses. And obviously we've seen Kansas City have volatility in their performance profile as well. So you at least have the out that, hey, this isn't going to be a varsity versus JV type situation in terms of a team being able to kind of run up the score. Sure, these offenses could have that kind of success if they execute really well in different things, but it's not an outrageous mismatch in terms of skill, which we've seen when the Rams play Jacksonville and when Tampa Bay plays Atlanta. It's hard to avoid those offenses. There's going to be points on the board.
So contrarian ideas at quarterback. Like back of my mind, there's a little bit of Lamar stuff. It is a hurdle to clear because he's got to beat a lot of really good players on the slate, but he's also the type of guy that, his rushing over under 64 yards, like it can happen. It's difficult to know how to play that game. The other guys, you get the edge of not only getting their points, but whatever comes along with it. Whereas Lamar,
right, it doesn't always bring people along with it.
There's like the bringbacks, like, we just talked about Hooper, Land, like Chubb's way overpriced, even though like I think he's unowned for like so I'm probably off Lamar, even though like in a vacuum it intrigues me when I think of the actual construction. I will be playing some of the Cam over Taysom variants. I don't know if it's something like I'm going all in on, but like if I had 3 Taysom lineups, I'd flip one to Cam for sure. Like
I think that makes sense too. I don't have great ways to differentiate a quarterback. I think it's game stacks are going to dictate my quarterback exposure, and then I just need to figure out. I'm probably managing my Taysom exposure on DraftKings to where I'm like not substantially different than the field is my guess. I have a hard time taking a really big stand on a quarterback just in general. but I also think he's clearly the best play. So I don't have a lot of great contrarian ideas for the quarterback position. I will say this, like from a game stack perspective, you know, Derek Carr, his pieces are going to be owned. He's not going to be owned. And then Cincinnati and San Francisco, which is number 2 in the game scores, those quarterbacks aren't going to be played at all. So for like MME stuff, the challenge is obviously you're fading a lot of high-end quarterback production. And there's question marks over whether those guys can generate high-end quarterback production. Burrow has shown the ability to. Jimmy G has not. I do think it helps Jimmy G that if Debo does not play in a weird way, because it takes away some rushing touchdown equity that they've seeded with Debo in. So, but those guys, it's large field stuff. I don't think I'd be doing that in smaller field, single entry 3-max.
Running back. So contrarian ideas. I do want to give kind of like the opposite case that I had to Jeff Wilson, which was like, hey, we might be being conservative on this workload. Like Adam, I can't stop using the term FUD now after with all this crypto stuff, but he's fudding me on Jeff Wilson in Slack chat. But like some of the health stuff around him is a little concerning, where like it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world for him to take an early exit or something. So
yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we've learned over the years with Kyle Shanahan's offenses is the role is more important than the player. And
unless it's Elijah Mitchell.
And so you've seen all these like late round draft picks and guys that are not touted as like elite running back prospects have a lot of success if they just get volume in that role. And what happens if Jeff Wilson does get hurt early? I mean, that's a volume role for JaMycal Hasty at no ownership, the same price tag. I think I'd probably guess that Hasty beats Wilson in, I don't know, maybe 20% of outcomes, something like that. But that's worth a shot.
Yeah.
Large field MME stuff.
Well, I mean, if Wilson legitimately like leaves early, I mean, Hasty's just his pass catching role alone is like pretty good. That's going to limp you to 10 points. And then if you get some goal line work, like I think, and who knows on the efficiency stuff, it's the team rushing efficiency is a little more important than the individual running back rushing efficiency. So that's especially in MME where it's like kind of easy to just play like 10% Hasty and sort of.
I also the other thing I'd note there is like that's a way to late swap pivot.
Yeah, Wilson to Hasty. I do think Hasty will carry some field exposure.
Yeah, agreed.
And like minimal, but agreed. I just don't. You're not getting him at like 1%.
Than the Detroit guys, though, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And I think he has a higher ceiling than the Detroit guys if everything goes right.
Yeah, less likely to hit it, but definitely higher. Yes. The other stuff, we're coming off quarterback. If you did want to fade Taysom, we're just kind of hoping the rushing touchdowns go to Alvin Kamara, who isn't going to be low. But if we, again, like kind of look at it more as like rankings of chalk, he's outside the top 5. And you've got Eckler as kind of coverage at the, Eckler and Fournette, 400 above, 400 below ish right there. So he was our cover for Establish a Million. The market has projected him a little bit better than they were initially. So again, he's not going to come in low. On FanDuel, you might catch him low, or at least lower, because he really does have a pretty expensive price tag there. But it's not like an unplayable tag given the different roles we've seen from Kamara, whether it was the 20+ carry role he had at the beginning of the year, which lines up well for this specific matchup against the Jets, or it's a role we saw him catch 10 balls against Seattle. So I do like Kamara, but you're not really finding someone that's like, you're not going to get like a 5% Kamara though.
Would you play Kamara and Taysom Hill in the same lineup?
I would, because I think there's a chance that the Saints could just score so many points that they both get there. I don't know if I will, but like I wouldn't tell people that actively avoid it. I do think part of the upside in playing Kamara is fading Taysom, but they can definitely get there together.
Yeah, that's every time I try to mute myself when the siren goes like once every 3 seconds. Just choose police
Drink.
officer. I think I've been going back and forth on whether to make a rule to exclude them, and I think the question mark is like, how confident do I feel that Taysom could throw a touchdown to Alvin? And I think pretty confident that he could. So I think that's the key on whether to play them together. But I saw some people in chat mentioning like play Cam with Kamara type thing, and I do think that's a better tournament play than playing Taysom with Kamara. In similar ideas, I like. What do you think about Chuba Hubbard? Because obviously Cam soaks up so much of the goal line rushing production, but we love attacking Atlanta, and we were playing Chuba Hubbard before when CMC was out, like at this price tag at chalk levels, and now no one's playing him against Atlanta, who we all admit is like a great matchup. So like he's a guy that kind of stood out to me as a potential contrarian play, but the projection is terrible.
Yeah, and the reason is it seemed like they soured on him a little bit, and we could be wrong here, but just kind of working in Abdullah a decent bit. You know, we had a few weeks there for Hubbard where I mean it was Sklansky Buck season. Like he had the workhorse role and it just didn't quite get there. And now it's okay, it's 5,900. It's a great matchup, but decent bit of opportunity cost at the position, and we're working in Abdullah, you know, for the pass down stuff and a little bit of rush stuff. So there is a way it goes right, which I think is Carolina, you know, just front runs this game and you get a lot of rush. You just get the efficient, right? You know, the 102 game, right? Like that's, but I'm probably not playing him in the small field stuff.
He's the only guy. He's the only guy that I saw that like had really low ownership that I saw and thought, man, that could be the guy.
Yeah, there's not like I said in MME. I mean, just Nick Chubb even projecting terribly just because of his ability to break long runs. Like I think at any point, like I think if you're playing MME, you should probably have like 6 to 8% Nick Chubb, right? Like if he's going to be. So I think you should have that if he's going to be like sub 1% or 5%, you know, like, but there's very Foreman. Yeah. I think Foreman is kind of the guy, right? Because we're assuming a lot of split stuff, but we haven't really had this game script from Tennessee. And
I mean, they ran the ball, like 30 times against New England while down 3 scores, like most of the game. So
yeah, and Hilliard worked in some of those situations. Like I think McNichols is back, so there's a third back this week, but he's kind of the Hilliard role. It's more like those two competing together, I think, at least to the point where it's worth a shot. So yeah, Foreman looks like the guy.
Yeah.
If you really wanted to torch yourself, like we're being pretty aggressive on Denver shifting some work to Javonte Williams after his big performance. But if they didn't, Melvin Gordon against Detroit is like, pretty cheap. We should talk about Javonte and that situation as well. I don't know where this field exposure is going to come in at on Javonte.
I think it really comes down to if there's any reporting on Melvin that people feel good about. If people feel good that Melvin's going to be subjected to a secondary role, I think people want to play Javonte. Everybody loves Javonte, right? Like from a talent standpoint, he's paid off when he's been chalk, which was one time, And so I think people want to play him. I think they're going to be looking for a reason to play him. But if you do not get that reason and we get McKissick out, Gibson is going to steal so much of that Javonte and Saquon are going to be the ones that it's taken from immediately.
Yeah. And
what about these Detroit running backs?
The Detroit running backs, I could see them being good plays in small field where like everyone just plays Jeff Wilson or goes somewhere different. And, Godwin is the guy that seemed like he had the pass down role and a little bit ahead of Jamar Jefferson. Jamar Jefferson's the guy we're more excited about from, a prospect perspective. if Jamar Jefferson's really gonna be played more than Godwin, I don't know. I think I like, taking some shots
Some Godwin
on
stacks
Godwin
this week.
here. But I mean, it's tough. Like, it's Detroit. Like, I also kind of like James Robinson, but it's like you said, like, you're starting to invest in some pretty shaky offenses.
Yeah, Godwin Igwe UK for those in the company that can't pronounce his name.
AKA
Shout out
me
Evan and Adam.
and me. At least I didn't call him Gordon. I mean, that's the easy part of his name to pronounce.
You can make Godwin stacks though. Chris and Igwe Buyake.
Oh, yeah. I guess like Mixon's probably not getting played, right?
No, Mixon will not be played. The illness thing, the questionable tag, that'll keep ownership down for sure. And then just in general, like there's too many running backs. So, he's if you're playing musical chairs, he's the one that doesn't have it.
Yeah. But yeah, in general, we're probably not going to go too crazy at running back. I will try to work Foreman in. I think he's early too, right? So like, yeah. So Foreman's early. Chubb for the MME only stuff is early. Just giving you some of the swap stuff that we talked about. Probably the big thing early would be, do you have the stones to fade Gibson, play someone contrarian? That's going to give you not a ton of information because you're still probably going to have a lot of slots open, but at least something to hinge off of.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to receiver. I think receiver's kind of exciting this week. I mean, any week I can play Jamar Chase is excited, which is every week because he keeps. I don't know, for those of you who did not watch Jamar Chase this past week, he decided to turn a 70-yard touchdown into an interception, which was quite remarkable.
Yeah.
So that hurt a little bit, Drew.
Yeah, I had Chase on the Chargers doubles bringbacks too, so that could have lit that game immediately up, turned it in a different direction. But yeah, I think basically the idea to talk through on wide receiver this week is there's a lot of very talented wide receivers that the ownership is going to get discounted because the ownership is going to condense on Tampa Bay and Buffalo, and Tyreek Hill and some of these other, like, and big Mike Williams and some of these other wide receivers. So Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Terry McLaurin, these guys, like it's a beautiful, beautiful range of wide receiver upside relative to the ownership that these guys would normally be, 10 to 15 if the ownership wasn't condensing so hard on the other wide receiver options.
Yeah, and this is where, are people going to play the Seattle guys, right? But if they do, if you sort on our ceiling projections, if you're not looking at the screen, Chase, CeeDee Lamb, McLaurin, Ayuk, Julio Jones, T. Higgins, we have, with T at 11% as the highest projected ownership of that group. I mean, that's a good group. And, the wide receiver values don't project, you're not giving up that many points, especially with some volatility there. So I really like that. There's also Jerry Jeudy in the mid tier where I think people are going to be so worried about game script that they might not play him, but he's someone that can, rack up catches, put together a pretty big game. Marquise Brown's going to be not played on either site, and the game environment looks terrible, but he's still like 25% target share guy. And I really do like these guys that have a distribution of targets like Marquise Brown, where you get the freebies and then you also get the big play potential. Like that's where we start to see some ceiling games.
Yeah.
I also I think there's a 10 catch DJ Moore game in here if it goes a certain way.
The one thing I love DJ Moore. I'm huge DJ Moore stan, but I feel like he's actually a little bit over-owned today, this week, in terms of like he's been dreadful from a production standpoint because they've been dreadful as an offense for the last 6 weeks, and now we're getting him at 10 to 15% when the price hasn't dipped crazily. So I actually kind of feel like he looks like he's going to be a little over-owned.
Yeah, I think in MME he might be. I think in small field,
I agree.
He gets squeezed a good bit, and I do think he's the type of guy where if they don't throw a lot, we could see one of those Michael Thomas games, where they would throw 26 times and Michael Thomas would have 11 of the targets, something like that. Could be wrong. Like that. This is definitely a little bit of an IKB. Don't get me wrong. Definitely a little bit of an IKB.
I just was expecting to see him at like 6, 5, 6%. Like
the problem is he's going to project well with CMC out, or at least decently everywhere.
I'm just it's shocking to me to see him less owned than, well, I mean, I guess they're basically owned the same, but I was going to say Amari. Like it just seems like people would have so much more confidence in Dallas's offense.
Amari's, it's a target share type thing. Really, is driving projections, which is driving some ownership. I do think on the high end, I'm just a stone homer, but I think there's some. I think both Tyreek and Stephon Diggs look. I guess like I'm probably gonna end up basically avoiding like Godwin, Mike Williams, and the Seattle guys is the way it's shaking out right now on DK. And if I do that, there's a lot of routes I can go. If you're playing on FanDuel, of course, the ownership stuff's a little bit different where Tyreek and Diggs get propped up a little bit, but like outside of that, it's kind of similar, right? Like, and Evans gets in there too. And I might eat chalk on one of the Tampa Bay guys just because like probably someone gets there, but it's kind of the same thing, right? Like Julio, CeeDee Lamb look really good. Judy looks pretty good. Amari looks pretty good. Tight end, I get to talk about Brock Wright, so that's exciting.
Who? Who's Brock Wright?
Brock Wright is gonna dominate this week, buddy.
Who the hell is Brock Wright?
He is going to be the starting tight end for the Detroit Lions this week.
What?
They have
I've never heard of this person.
We did get into some back and forth on whether or not I was projecting Brock Wright too aggressively. I probably am, but he's actually somewhat athletic. He ran, a 4.6 40 at like a massive size.
I'm like not entirely sure this isn't a bit, and you just like inserted a create a player name to see if I would like talk as if I knew who they
as our
were.
Second projected tight end value. So not a bit. The only other tight end they have is some like total dust bunny Zylstra or something. Shane Zylstra, an undrafted.
How many Zylstras are in the league? That's two? There's two Zylstras in the league?
Two Zylstras. They had some positive comments. Trust me, I went down the Brock Wright. He lives on like an exotic like animal ranch in Texas or something.
Get out of here. What is happening?
Yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing.
There's no way. I'm not falling for this. I'm not.
He scored a touchdown last week, Drew.
I'm not falling for this.
3 targets, scored a touchdown. Whatever. I'm playing Brock Wright, okay? Because I'm just gonna roll the dice with this dude who's big and kind of fast instead of playing, 5 for 30s from O'Shags and Hooper. So I actually am gonna play Brock Wright, or not. Brock Exotic will be in some of my lineups on DraftKings for the stone minimum.
I'm legitimately not sure that this is a real person that I'm being set up. So I'm going to research after the show, and then I'll have takes on Brock Wright.
What's funny is he's not even in the player profiler database because he played so little bit in college. He did go to Notre Dame, though.
Notre Dame's a tight end factory. So, oh my God, the Sirens.
The Sirens are really back. The Lions have half of the Zylstra and St. Brown brothers. True story. Okay, now we'll get onto some tight ends that Drew is more familiar with. But Drew, I think this could get steamed a little bit on Kittle, but right now, like we don't have people paying up for tight end on DraftKings. So we missed out last week, Drew. And we've got Gronk, Kittle, and Kelsey projected for a combined like 20% this week. Throwing Andrews and Pitts, we maybe get to like 30. This tight end grouping as a whole, I mean, like, is this the Pitts week, man?
So the Sirens just will not stop over here. I think Santa Con has like run amok, which it usually does, and is just an utter disaster of a day. So I think that's what's happening right now. But if it has to be Kyle Pitts week, because I played him last week, and if I know anything about the tight end position, it's whoever I played the week before, because I had Kittle the week before the breakout game, played Pitts last week.
We definitely had Goddard in there somewhere. Maybe it wasn't
Goddard. I
think the week before you said he was a $6,500 player.
He was a $6,500. He played like a $6,500 player. I'm so glad that Hurts got ruled out last week, because I would not have played Goddard. I played him with Minshew, and that was my good team that like had a chance until I went bad. But no, I think Kyle Pitts is interesting. I'm gonna go back to the Thanksgiving drinking show. Well, I think Dawson Knox is pretty interesting too.
Yeah, I feel like there's a group of tight ends that like almost. If I just said, okay, these tight ends at this ownership, I'm going to play them mechanically all year long. And one of these weeks I'm going to get right. Like anytime.
Yeah, but to do that, you'd be playing more teams than you normally play, or you'd be playing double tight end every.
No, I'd have to slim it. I'd have to slim it down to like, I'd have to pick like 2 or 3 guys at the beginning of the season. I wouldn't be able to like expand to all these guys. You're right there.
That's the problem, because I'm telling you, Mike, I try that strategy and I don't have enough freaking teams to do it every week. And I keep ending up like it's the whack-a-mole game where every week I pop up.
Did you mention Njoku?
4.2 from George Kittle, and then I go to whack it and he goes under, and then he pops back up for 45 and I don't have him.
Some of us said the 45 was
so tilted by this George Kittle. Especially when I played Ayuk, and like all my money is riding on Ayuk. Oh
yeah. I don't know if we gave anything productive there, but we're not.
No, probably not.
I do think like as a group though, God, someone from this group is going to go. Good luck, everybody.
I think Dawson Knox is a really, really good tournament play this week.
Yeah. That's what I'll have to check the ownership on though, just because sometimes those guys get dragged with the game. I don't see it getting high.
He usually doesn't, and he's priced up enough that I don't think
so expensive. Yeah, he's so.
If he was 4,400, I think he would, but at 5K, I don't think he does.
I think I'm playing Kyle Pitts at that point. I don't know though. It's interesting.
This is what everybody else is going to do. This is why I'm saying it's Dawson Knox, and then it'll be Kyle Pitts.
I'm playing a Brock Wright team. Nobody can stop me.
What could go wrong?
And then I'm playing.
Can only go right.
A Kyle Pitts, DJ Moore team with Cam Newton. I see the stars aligning. Cam, DJ Moore, Kyle Pitts. So much money to be won. All right, let's go to DST, the chat's favorite of the positions.
There's not like a cheap chalk one this week. That makes me happy.
Oh, I guess they're not that cheap.
No. There is a crazy chalk one, but they're not cheap, which is the way I like it. When they're cheap, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I feel like this is.
I'm like, okay, I can just fade.
On DraftKings, do not play Seattle, Carolina, Cleveland. This is my advice every week at DST. I just sort on projected ownership and just say, hey, don't play these double-digit ones. Play literally anything else. On FanDuel, don't play the Chargers. Or Seattle.
If you'd like to be a potential host of Establish the Million down the road, just work on filtering by projected ownership and saying don't play these 3, and then also include the projections graphic on the screen with your intro, and you're like 70% of the way there. Just mix in a few old guys that you want to recommend as well, and you can come for Leone's job.
Don't push it, honored guest. Don't push it. All right, Drew. We do have to get flag plants.
Yeah, I've got 2 flag plants. I don't think
is one Brock right?
No, I'm not falling for this thing.
Drew, I am 100% convinced that Drew is not 100% convinced that Brock Wright is real.
I'm not. I'm like 70% convinced that this is a real player, because I don't think you would like put a fake player on the projections, but there's like a 30% chance that you guys would all fuck with me. So I'm still holding out. All right, my first flag plant. We talked about that wide receiver section being really juicy for low ownership and high ceiling, and I'm going right to it with CeeDee Lamb. I think if Tony Pollard is limited or out, which sounds like it, they're going to need big play explosiveness. I think with Cooper and Gallup back, it condenses it spreads the target share and makes the projection weaker. But I think the ceiling is still there for CeeDee Lamb. All the reasons that we love CeeDee Lamb coming into the season. Now you get him at low ownership. CeeDee Lamb is my first flag plant.
I'm going to flag plant something on brand as far as an old, Drew. But Julio Jones, the injury return game heuristic is in play.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's going to play him. And I think he's at a really palatable price tag where you could survive. That was tough last week, man. Like if you got 15 out of your wide receiver, you just got screwed. You didn't survive it. But there are weeks where you get 15 out of Julio at 5K, you survive. And the thing with Julio is there's a chance his target share is insane, right? Like we're not projecting it, but would it shock you if he had like 33% of the team's targets with what they're rolling out?
No, if he had 6 targets this week, that would not shock me.
So yeah, I mean that type of upside in terms of we don't get guys very often, I guess, that have that gap between like what we're projecting because we're not sure. And like next week we could be projecting a 28% target share for Julio Jones.
I think those are much better sales points than you could survive a 15 from this 60.
No, I'm just saying like, I guess my point is like, he's fine as is, I guess is what I'm like his 14 that he's projected, like you're fine as it. This is with like a low 20s target share. Like you're fine as is.
Yeah. I understand. It just wasn't selling the upside. If
well, I have to, when I talk about old players, you have
to subdue it so you don't get attached to them long term. I know.
No, it's this narrative that's been pushed by you and the ship chasing people that have biased the audience against me, that I have to go overly measured with my take.
Yeah. Well,
I'm backed me into this corner.
I'm going to stick in Tennessee for my second flag plant.
I almost just took like a double Tennessee player just to screw
that would have really screwed things up for me. But I'm going Donta Foreman as the flag plant. I think you want to take shots on early contrarian players. I think I've done that with Lamb and Foreman, that if I'm taking an above average position compared to the field on those guys, I will have enough information to know which direction I can go in the late games with stacks and spends and different things like that. And so that's a really important thing to me. Tennessee's high total looks like a great place to target for that, which is why I think either Julio Jones or Foreman look like interesting options. We've seen Tannehill spread it around before, so it's not guaranteed that if they meet their team total, we will still find a ceiling performance from these guys. But at these ownership levels, I don't think you're I think you're getting compensated appropriately for the upside. You're getting a really, really good bargain on the upside and the ceiling relative to the ownership. So I like attacking Tennessee, agree with Mike, and I'll go Donta Foreman as my second flag plant.
Okay. I'm not going to lie to you, Drew. Having a tough time with this next one.
Because you just don't want to say Jamar Chase's name again? Casey's going with Alvin Kamara, who is our cover boy on the show. I kind of figured you would go in that direction because you kind of like the sort of chalky guys.
I mean, I want to do Jamar Chase, but I don't know if we're allowed to flag plant a player more than 5 times over the duration of a season. So probably not going to do it.
I'll go with Kamara. All the things you talked about doing with tight end, you have literally done with Jamar Chase. You just play him every single week.
I should have been doing it with Kid. I guess I pretty much was doing it with Kid. I think I did have him last week. I just had him on the wrong team, really. Yeah. God, I don't know, man. It's a tough week. I'm gonna default go with the cover boy, Alvin Kamara.
There we go. You and Casey.
So much conviction. I'm really selling both of these flag plants hard, but excuse me. Give me the Taysom leverage on DraftKings. On FanDuel, you don't really get the Taysom leverage, but you're going to get less field exposure to start with just because of the price tag. And kind of with Julio, there is some input volatility here where, I mean, we're assuming that Taysom might not check it down a ton, but like they have nobody. And we're also like, because Taysom takes a lot of carries and we're still splitting Kamara's carries because they give the RB2 some carries like Tony Jones. Update this milk toast flag plant on weekend.
It just means you got to come with a stronger support for an updated flag plan tomorrow.
Kyle, just back off, Kyle. Okay. I was really starting to get into this sales pitch too. Okay.
You were just about to nail it. I could tell.
I was that close. My point being, there's a chance that we get like a 10 target, 20 carry game from Melvin Kamara against the Jets, which if we knew we were getting, he would be massive chalk everywhere. And I do think this Gibson stuff is going to flow through to all the backs.
I do have one last question before we sign off for you, Mike.
You
are the resident Buffalo Bills expert. And I think the most important question on this slate is to stack or not stack Tampa Bay and Buffalo. Do you think the Bills defense shows up? Do you think that this is a game that underperforms expectations? Or do you think this is the nuclear option this week with all sorts of pass volume and lots of catches?
I think it's the nuclear option, but dude, why you put me on the spot like this? My heart says it's the nuclear option. My brain says that I'm probably not going to play enough of it. And I'm just going to be pissed the whole time.
All right. So nuclear option it is.
Yeah. I think me being pissed actually probably should add confidence to the nuclear option.
It did for me.
Yeah. Steph Diggs eruption. Just play Steph Diggs. That's who I should have flag planted, but
I'm sure you'll have another opportunity tomorrow morning.
You know what, Drew? I'm sick of your shit, okay? Why don't you take us out? Let's see what you got, okay?
Well, as an honored guest of the show, I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this fine Saturday morning. Week 14's Establish the Million episode. We'll be back for week 15 with myself, hopefully, as an honored guest and host, Mike Leone, unless you all come in with submissions on how to sort filtered projected ownership on defenses. Appreciate you all for joining us on this Saturday morning. Good luck in all your games. Join us for Wake